Snow fell in slow, silent sheets, settling on the iron rails, wooden platform, and the worn benches of the small train station. The world beyond the station seemed empty, frozen in a hush broken only by the distant cry of a crow and the whispering wind through the skeletal trees. A young mother sat on a wooden bench, her shoulders hunched against the cold, her hands clutching a baby wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. Her hair, dark and damp from the falling snow, clung to her face, framing eyes that seemed too large for a world that had turned harsh and cruel. Her gaze flicked constantly to the horizon, waiting for a train that would not come, hoping for a chance that had long ago grown slim. Every creak of the distant tracks made her stomach twist with a bitter mixture of hope and dread. She had been abandoned, left to face the bitter winds and frozen earth with nothing but her child and her courage, fragile as it was. The baby stirred in her arms, cooing softly, a sound that drew her back from the edge of despair. She whispered lullabies into the icy wind, her voice trembling, but steady enough to calm the small life in her arms. Minutes stretched like hours, each passing sound, the distant bark of a dog, the scrape of metal against wood, made her flinch. Her heart ached not only from the cold but from the weight of loneliness and fear. The station, once a place of comings and goings, had become a symbol of abandonment, of promises broken and dreams left behind. She had no family, no friend, and the townsfolk would look away if she called for help. She was invisible, a ghost on the edge of society, carrying the only piece of her heart that remained, her child. And then, beyond the hills and the darkened horizon, the faint sound of hooves broke through the wind. At first, she thought it was a trick of her imagination, the desperate mind of someone who had known too much disappointment. But the sound grew louder, steady, measured. A lone figure emerged from the gray, mounted on a horse that moved with careful strength. His coat was dusted with snow, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over a face carved with rugged determination. There was a weight in his presence, a quiet command over the world around him, yet a gentleness that seemed to extend toward the woman and her child. She held her breath as he approached, unsure whether to hope or fear. Strangers could be cruel, they could offer nothing but more suffering. And yet, as he dismounted, his eyes scanning her with a calm, steady gaze, there was something different this time, an absence of judgment, a presence of quiet understanding. He came closer, slow and deliberate, so as not to startle them, and finally spoke, his voice low and soft, carrying over the whispering wind. "Ma'am, can I help?" It was not a question filled with demand or expectation. It was simple, genuine, a lifeline thrown across the snow and the cold and the loneliness of her heart. For the first time that evening, she felt her frozen hope stir, fragile, tentative, but real. And the baby cooed again, as if sensing that the world had just shifted, that someone had come not to take, but to give. The silent cowboy stood there, snow swirling around him, his coat dusted white. He did not speak further yet, but the promise in his presence was enough. In that moment, on that desolate train platform, two lives, one small and fragile, the other steady and strong, teetered on the edge of change. And the winds of the frontier whispered, carrying with them the first hint of hope, the first sign that perhaps, even in a world so cold and cruel, kindness could still be found. The wind bit sharply through the empty station, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and the distant smoke of distant chimneys. Snow swirled in restless patterns around the young mother and her baby, pressing against their thin defenses. She clutched the child closer, rocking gently, trying to shield them both from the cold that had seeped into her bones. The silence of the evening was broken only by the soft scraping of her boots against the wooden bench and the baby's occasional whimper. She had expected no one, had expected only the world's cruelty, but then came the sound of hooves, steady, purposeful, and unnervingly calm amidst the chaos of the storm. The figure emerged from the gray horizon slowly, his silhouette defined by the setting sun behind him. Dust and snow clung to his coat, the edges frozen with frost. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, but the slight tilt of his head betrayed an attentiveness, a focus on the fragile figures on the platform. He guided his horse carefully, aware of the slick, icy boards underfoot, and dismounted with deliberate grace, boots crunching against the frozen snow. Every movement was measured, steady, conveying a quiet strength tempered with careful gentleness. The young mother's pulse quickened. She had seen men in the West, some kind, many cruel. She had learned to judge, to fear, to retreat. But there was something different about this man. He did not approach with suspicion, nor did he cast judgment on her torn dress or the desperate way she clutched her child. He stopped a few steps away, tilting his head slightly, letting the wind carry his words softly toward her. "Ma'am, can I help?" The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Not a command, not an assumption, but an offer, quiet, sincere, and patient. Relief flickered through her chest, mingling with disbelief. Could a stranger truly offer them kindness in a world that had shown only indifference? The cowboy's gaze softened as he noticed the baby stirring against her chest, a small coo breaking the wind's monotony. His voice, calm and steady, carried a hint of reassurance as he added, "It's cold out here, you shouldn't be left alone." Her fingers trembled as she nodded, unsure whether to trust this silent guardian who had appeared like a figure from a dream. She had no words, only a fragile hope that perhaps fate had not abandoned her entirely. The baby gurgled, and he smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement that the small life in her arms mattered to him as much as it mattered to her. Slowly, he stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow, careful not to startle them. With deliberate gentleness, he offered his arm, a bridge across fear and mistrust. The mother hesitated, then placed her small, cold hand in his, feeling an unexpected warmth radiate from him. It was not only the heat of his body but the strength of his presence, a silent promise that they would not face the night alone. Above them, the sky shifted to a deep indigo, stars peeking through clouds as if witnessing the meeting of two souls on a frozen platform. The wind continued to swirl, but now it carried something new, a hint of hope, of salvation, of the beginning of a journey neither had anticipated, yet both would come to rely upon. In that moment, on a snow-covered train station far from any certainty, two lives, one fragile, one strong, collided under the watchful gaze of the frontier. And the first chapter of their shared story began, silent yet profound, filled with the quiet promise of courage, trust, and the slow-burning warmth of human kindness. The cabin stood just beyond a small stand of pines, smoke curling faintly from its crooked chimney. Its wooden walls were weathered and rough, yet within them lay warmth and refuge from the merciless cold. Snow clung to the roof and window sills, drifts piling high against the door, but inside, the fire sputtered, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn boards. The young mother stepped cautiously over the threshold, baby still clutched tightly to her chest, her breath forming clouds in the faint warmth. Her boots crunched over the wooden floor, a reminder that even within shelter, the world outside still lingered in memory. The cowboy moved quietly, stoking the fire until the flames roared, sending golden light across the room. He set a rough blanket on the floor for the baby, who cooed in curiosity, tiny hands reaching toward the dancing shadows. She hesitated, unsure of how to act, as if stepping into this small cabin was akin to stepping into a dream she had long ago thought impossible. The smell of smoke and pine mingled with the faint tang of her fear, and yet, the warmth of the fire promised something she had not felt in months: safety. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. The silence of the cabin was not empty. It was filled with subtle, unspoken communication, glances, gestures, and the careful attentiveness of two strangers beginning to trust one another. She adjusted the blanket around her child, and he adjusted the fire, each act echoing care in its own quiet way. The baby wriggled, and she laughed softly, the sound breaking through the tension that had clung to her shoulders. The cowboy allowed himself a faint smile, the first crack in the armor of stoic isolation that had defined him for years. Outside, the wind howled and snow drummed against the roof, but within, there was stillness. The mother placed a small kettle on the hearth, letting it warm. The cowboy helped her, and as they worked together, the first threads of connection began to weave themselves between them. She felt it, a fragile spark of hope that perhaps the world still held moments of grace, kindness, and even love. She glanced at him, and though he said nothing, his steady gaze reassured her. They would survive this night. Hours passed, and the storm outside showed no sign of relenting. Yet inside the cabin, the fire's warmth penetrated the chill not just of the air, but of the heart. The mother finally sat, exhausted, the baby asleep against her chest. He handed her a rough mug of hot tea, the steam rising like a bridge between them. She accepted it with a nod, and in that small exchange, something profound shifted. The silent cowboy was no longer merely a stranger, he was a protector, a guardian of the fragile life she carried, and perhaps, unknowingly, a companion for the lonely journey that lay ahead. Night fell fully over the hills, turning the cabin into an island of light in the frozen landscape. She listened to the wind howl outside, no longer with fear, but with a quiet gratitude that someone had come, someone strong, silent, and kind. In the stillness, she realized that warmth was more than fire, more than blankets. It was presence, steadfast and unwavering, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, and vast, but in this small cabin, on this stormy night, two lives had collided in the simplest, most profound way. Through care, protection, and the quiet beginning of trust. And in the flickering firelight, the first chapter of their journey toward hope and love continued. Unspoken, patient, and full of promise. The fire crackled softly, sending golden sparks into the dim cabin light. Outside, the wind continued its relentless howl across the snow-covered plains, rattling the cabin walls and pressing against the windows like a persistent reminder of the harsh world beyond. Inside, however, there was a small island of warmth, not just from the fire, but from the presence of another human being who had chosen to stay, to care, to offer shelter when all else had failed. The cowboy moved quietly across the cabin, placing a rough wooden tray on the table. Upon it were slices of bread, a hunk of cheese, and a small kettle of tea, simple fare, but enough to sustain body and spirit in a world that had offered little mercy. The young mother hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a slice of bread. Hunger gnawed at her belly, a physical echo of the emotional emptiness she had carried for so long. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth that began to return with each bite, and the baby nestled against her chest, cooing softly, his tiny fingers curling around her coat. The cowboy seated himself across from her, his movements deliberate and measured, as if even his posture was a silent assurance of safety. He watched her carefully, not with scrutiny or expectation, but with a quiet attentiveness that spoke volumes. There were no questions yet about her past, no assumptions about her life, only presence. And in the gentle rhythm of the firelight flickering across their faces, the mother felt a fragile sense of trust beginning to bloom. Conversation between them was minimal at first. Words had weight, and silence often carried more meaning than speech ever could. She spoke softly, recounting little stories of her journey to the train station, leaving out the parts that still stung too deeply to voice. He listened, nodding occasionally, offering small murmurs of acknowledgement, the kind that did not intrude but affirmed her reality. It was in the quiet moments, the way he refilled her cup without a word, the way he adjusted the baby's blanket, that she began to understand the depth of his kindness. The baby stirred, and the mother laughed softly, the sound carrying across the cabin like a gentle promise. The cowboy's eyes softened at the sound, and for a moment, the stoic mask of his past faded, revealing a man capable of care, patience, and connection. It was the kind of intimacy that did not demand words, the kind that built bridges through action and attention. Outside, the snow swirled relentlessly, but inside, the cabin seemed a world apart. Time passed unnoticed, measured only by the flicker of the fire and the rhythmic cooing of the baby. In this small, quiet space, two souls began to recognize one another, not through grand gestures, but through subtle acts of compassion and shared humanity. The mother realized that she had not known safety, warmth, or understanding in months, yet here it was, offered freely by a man who had no reason to care beyond the simplest decency of the heart. As the meal concluded, she leaned back, letting herself breathe, feeling the tension that had gripped her shoulders for so long slowly release. The cowboy remained, his eyes scanning the horizon through the cabin window, ever watchful, ever steady. And in that moment, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a heartbeat, a future where they were no longer strangers, where fear and loneliness were replaced by trust and hope. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls, and the silence between them spoke of beginnings. The beginnings of understanding, of connection, of a bond that would grow stronger with each shared glance, each quiet act, and each night survived together. Tonight, she was not alone. Tonight, she could hope. Night descended slowly over the cabin, folding the world outside in a thick blanket of darkness. Snow swirled relentlessly across the plains, rattling the window panes and whispering against the roof. Inside, the fire's golden glow offered a fragile barrier against the cold and the unknown, painting flickering shadows across the walls and floor. The young mother, exhausted from the day's journey, held her baby close, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her chest, a rhythm that echoed both fear and wonder. She was safe here, yes, but safety was a fragile thing, one that could vanish with the wind or a careless word. The cowboy moved silently about the cabin, tending the fire and making small adjustments to ensure warmth reached every corner. Every crackle of the flames seemed to mark a measure of protection, a promise unspoken yet profoundly felt. He laid another blanket near the hearth, soft and thick, so the baby could rest comfortably. His movements were deliberate, careful, respectful, the quiet actions of a man who understood the weight of responsibility and the fragility of trust. The mother finally allowed herself to sit, her back resting against the wall, baby still swaddled in her arms. She watched him, this silent guardian, whose presence had shifted the world around her. He did not need to speak to show that he was a protector. Every small gesture, the way he stoked the fire, the way he ensured the baby was warm and secure, the way he avoided invading their space, conveyed more meaning than words ever could. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, carrying snow in furious swirls that battered the cabin walls. The storm would rage through the night, relentless and unforgiving, but inside, the mother and child were insulated by more than fire and blankets. There was a growing sense of calm, a fragile peace built on the steady presence of another human being who had chosen to stay. She let herself breathe, letting go of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. The baby stirred slightly, cooing, and she laughed softly, a sound that seemed impossibly delicate yet full of life. The cowboy settled into a corner near the hearth, watchful but distant, his eyes scanning the shadows and the wind-swept horizon beyond the window. He did not sleep yet, his vigilance a silent promise that nothing would reach them as long as he was there. For the first time in months, the mother felt the edges of fear soften. Perhaps it was not just the warmth of the cabin, the fire, or the blankets. Perhaps it was something deeper, the certainty of presence, of protection, of unspoken understanding. Hours passed. The storm continued its fury, but inside, the rhythm of the fire and the baby's breathing set a quiet cadence. The mother's eyes drifted closed, a tentative surrender to exhaustion, while the baby nestled against her chest, comforted by her heartbeat. She was not alone. The cowboy's shadow moved with the firelight, a steadfast sentinel in the darkness, his presence marking the first chapter of a bond that would grow slowly, patiently, and with immense care. In that small cabin, under the relentless snow and the indifferent sky, something remarkable was taking root. A quiet trust, fragile yet strong, built from care, vigilance, and the promise of another day. The night was long, but for the first time, fear no longer dominated her heart. Tonight, she was safe. Tonight, she could sleep. And somewhere deep in her chest, a seed of hope began to stir, tiny but certain, as if whispering, "Perhaps life can be gentle again. Perhaps love can be found where despair once lived." Dawn crept slowly across the plains, brushing the snow with pale pink and gold. The world outside the cabin was cold and still, frost glinting like tiny diamonds across the landscape. Inside, warmth lingered from the fire that had burned through the night, its gentle glow casting long shadows that stretched across the wooden walls and floor. The young mother stirred in her blankets, careful not to wake her baby, whose small hands twitched as sleep still clung to him. She breathed in the quiet, savoring the contrast between the storm that had raged hours before and the fragile calm of morning. The cowboy had already risen, tending the horses in the small corral beside the cabin. The snow crunched under his boots, the rhythmic sound echoing across the plains. His movements were deliberate, steady, and patient, as though every action was a small affirmation that the world could still hold order and kindness amidst chaos. The mother watched from the doorway, a faint smile brushing her lips, her heart warmed by the sight of him quietly working in the soft morning light. He had not spoken, nor had he needed to. Every motion carried assurance, every glance carried protection. The baby stirred, eyes blinking open as the morning light filtered through the cabin window. The mother adjusted the blanket around him and brought him close, feeling his warmth seep into her chilled arms. She whispered soft words of comfort, and in that moment, she realized something profound, that even in a world full of hardship, there were moments of grace, moments when human kindness could shine brighter than any storm. The cowboy returned to the cabin with a bucket of fresh water, careful not to spill, his eyes scanning the horizon as though he could anticipate any danger before it arrived. He placed the water near the hearth and nodded toward the mother and child, a silent invitation to begin the day. She felt an unfamiliar sense of relief, not only from the warmth and safety of the cabin but from the steady presence of a man who had arrived without expectation, without judgment, offering only care and protection. Breakfast was simple: bread toasted over the fire, tea poured into wooden mugs. They ate together quietly, sharing glances and the occasional smile. Words were minimal but unnecessary. In the unspoken exchanges, a bond continued to grow. The cowboy had shown her that safety was not only about shelter, but about presence, vigilance, and respect. And slowly, she began to realize that trust was possible again, fragile, delicate, but undeniable. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, snow glistening under the new sun, the horizon vast and untamed. The mother felt the stirrings of possibility in her chest, a sense that life could move forward, that hope could exist even after abandonment, fear, and despair. She looked at the cowboy, standing quietly by the doorway, his silhouette framed by the morning light, and understood that he represented more than protection. He represented a new beginning. The baby cooed again, and for a moment, all the fear of the past seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet certainty that they would endure. In the vast expanse of the frontier, under a sky that seemed impossibly wide and endless, two lives continued to intertwine. One was fragile, dependent, and uncertain; the other steady, patient, and strong. Together, they faced a world that had been cruel, but now held the promise of safety, warmth, and, perhaps most importantly, hope. And so, morning on the plains was not merely a beginning of a day. It was the beginning of a life slowly, carefully shaped by kindness, courage, and the quiet promise of love yet to come. The sun had climbed higher, melting the frost in soft rivulets that trickled along the snow-dusted plains. The mother dressed her baby in warm layers, checking the blankets that wrapped him tightly against the lingering chill. The cabin, though modest, had become a sanctuary, a small world of warmth, firelight, and safety. But supplies were running low, and the harsh reality of life beyond the trees could not be ignored. She knew they had to face Dry Hollow, a town she had avoided for months, a place where whispers and judgment followed those who were vulnerable. The cowboy stood nearby, adjusting his coat and tightening the reins on the horse. He did not speak immediately, allowing her space to gather her courage. His presence was steady, a silent reassurance that no harm would come as long as he rode beside them. She glanced at him, and for a brief moment, fear and hesitation clashed with a growing trust. She had learned to be wary, to hide, to protect herself and her child from the cruelty of strangers. But this man, quiet, watchful, unyielding in his calm strength, had begun to dissolve that wall she had built around her heart. They mounted the horse together, the baby secured between them, and began the slow ride toward town. Snow crunched under the hooves, each step echoing across the frozen landscape. The townsfolk paused in their daily routines, eyes widening as the small family approached. She felt the familiar sting of self-consciousness, expecting whispers, judgment, perhaps ridicule. She braced herself, clutching the baby closer. But as they drew nearer, she realized that the cowboy did not waver, did not bow to the unspoken rules of gossip or fear. His quiet presence acted as a shield, a barrier between them and the eyes of those who might judge too harshly. In the town square, she felt herself stiffen, ready to retreat, to vanish back into the snow and safety of the cabin. Yet he gently nudged her forward with a calm assurance. The townsfolk murmured, but he ignored them, holding his head high, shoulders square, exuding a strength that demanded neither admiration nor acknowledgement, only respect. She realized then that this silent guardian had not simply come to protect her physically. He had come to protect her dignity, to create a space where she could exist without shame. They gathered supplies, flour, sugar, blankets, and a few small comforts for the cabin. The townsfolk watched, whispers trailing behind, but she no longer felt the sting. The cowboy's silent support gave her courage she had not known she possessed. In each glance he offered, each small, steady gesture, she saw something new: the possibility of safety, trust, and even a life beyond survival. The baby cooed softly, and she smiled down at him, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the fire in the cabin. By the time they rode back toward the cabin, the sun had fully claimed the sky, bathing the plains in light. The journey through town, though brief, had changed her. She understood now that safety and kindness could exist even in a harsh world, and that sometimes, one person's steadfast presence could protect more than just body, it could protect hope itself. As the cabin came into view, smoke curling gently from the chimney, she realized something profound. Life could be fragile, but love, quiet, patient, redemptive love, had a way of taking root even in the coldest, harshest places. And under the endless western sky, she allowed herself to imagine a future shaped not by fear or abandonment, but by trust, care, and the steady promise of someone who would not leave. Spring approached slowly, the snow melting into streams that glittered across the plains. The cabin, once a refuge from a winter storm, had begun to feel like something more, a place of life, warmth, and possibility. The young mother moved through the small space with newfound confidence, the baby now more alert, cooing softly from the blanket laid across the hearth. Each small task, from preparing breakfast to tending the fire, carried a sense of purpose she had not known in months. She had learned the fragility of survival, but in this cabin, under the quiet watch of the cowboy, she discovered the first flickers of stability. The cowboy worked silently outside, repairing the fence that had bowed under the weight of snow, stacking firewood neatly against the cabin wall. His movements were deliberate, a rhythm of labor that spoke of patience and strength. There was no rush, no hurry, only steady care, each action a testament to the resilience of a man who had weathered storms both outside and within. Occasionally, he glanced toward the cabin, ensuring that she and the baby were safe, that the small home they were creating remained a sanctuary against the world. She ventured outside, carrying a basket of freshly gathered herbs and water. The baby nestled against her chest, eyes wide with curiosity. He gurgled happily, reaching toward the cowboy who now approached to help her gather firewood. Their hands brushed briefly as they worked together, a simple, quiet connection that needed no words. It was in these small moments, the passing of a tool, the adjustment of a blanket, the shared glance over a snow-kissed fence, that trust began to transform into something more profound. The first intimations of love. Life began to take shape. They planted a small vegetable garden, tilled the soil, and tended each seed as though it were a promise. The mother laughed softly when the baby reached for the young shoots, tiny fingers pressing into the cool dirt. The cowboy smiled quietly, leaning on his shovel, watching her with an expression that carried admiration, respect, and a steady affection he did not yet need to name. The rhythm of work, the shared responsibilities, and the quiet presence of another human being created a new kind of life, one defined not by survival alone, but by care, trust, and companionship. Evenings were spent by the hearth, the fire crackling as they shared meals and small conversations. Words were still few, but their meaning grew in each glance, in every small act of kindness. She realized that home was not simply the cabin or the fire or the walls that protected them from the wind. Home was the presence of someone who stood unwavering, who offered strength without expectation, and love without demand. The cowboy had become not only her protector, but her partner, her anchor in a world that had once been cruel and indifferent. The baby giggled, stretching tiny arms toward both of them, and the mother laughed, a full, clear sound that echoed across the plains. The cowboy's gaze softened, a rare, unguarded smile brushing his lips. They had survived the storm together, and now they were building more than a home. They were building a life, a family, a future. And in the quiet of the plains, under a sky that stretched endlessly above them, she felt a certainty she had thought impossible. That love, patient and redemptive, could take root even in the harshest soil, and that together, they could weather any storm yet to come. The sun poured over the plains in a golden haze, stretching shadows across the cabin and warming the frost-melted earth. The air was crisp but forgiving, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth, the first hints of spring after a long, merciless winter. Inside the cabin, the young mother sat near the hearth, gently rocking her baby, who was awake now and babbling softly, tiny hands reaching for the warmth of the firelight. There was a quiet contentment in the room, a fragile peace that had taken weeks of storms, both outside and within their hearts, to cultivate. The cowboy moved about the cabin, carrying wood and stacking it neatly by the hearth. Each motion was careful, precise, and yet effortless, a rhythm that had begun to blend with the routines of the Mother's Day, a silent choreography of two lives learning to exist together. He paused as he noticed her glance, their eyes meeting briefly. There was something unspoken in that moment, a recognition of shared endurance, shared hope, and the quiet comfort of presence. It was the first time since their meeting that the mother allowed herself to meet his gaze fully, without fear or hesitation, and it sparked something gentle and profound within her chest. The baby cooed, wriggling happily, and the mother laughed, a sound so light and pure that it seemed to push back the shadows of every fear and sorrow she had carried. The cowboy's lips curved in response, slow and subtle, a smile not just at the baby but at her, at the life, the warmth, the fragility, and the resilience she carried with her. It was a shared moment, delicate and fleeting, yet charged with meaning. It spoke of trust earned, of boundaries respected, of the slow emergence of connection and the unspoken acknowledgement of mutual care. Outside, the plains were alive with soft murmurs of spring, the distant drip of melting snow, the rustle of unseen animals in the underbrush, the wind gently carrying the scent of thawing earth. Within the cabin, the fire crackled, punctuating their quiet moments with warmth and light. She dared, for the first time, to lean toward him slightly as she handed him a cup of tea. Their fingers brushed, deliberate yet gentle, and the simple contact caused a flutter of awareness that neither had expected. The connection was subtle, small, but undeniable, the first real bridge between two lives that had collided amidst snow, fear, and survival. He met her eyes again, holding her gaze with quiet steadiness. No words were necessary. In the arc of that glance, she understood something she had not dared to believe before. She was seen, valued, and safe. And she felt, perhaps for the first time, that love could exist quietly, patiently, without rush or demand, and that its warmth could grow slowly into something unbreakable. The baby babbled again, and both of them laughed softly together, their smiles overlapping, merging in a fragile harmony of joy and hope. It was a first shared laugh, a first shared moment of real connection, and it marked the turning point of their story. From survival to trust, from trust to hope, and now, to the delicate beginnings of love. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting long, golden streaks across the plains. Inside, warmth, life, and a sense of belonging filled the cabin. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, the mother and the cowboy shared something more than a smile. They shared a promise, unspoken but profoundly understood, that together, they could face whatever storms remained, and that perhaps, love could be found even in the harshest of lands. The first rays of dawn stretched across the plains, illuminating the cabin with a soft, golden glow. The snow had nearly melted, leaving streams that sparkled like scattered diamonds across the thawing earth. Birds called from the distant trees, their songs carrying a promise of renewal and life. Inside the cabin, the young mother sat on the hearth's edge, the baby resting comfortably against her chest. The warmth of the fire, the soft glow of the morning sun, and the steady presence of the cowboy who moved quietly about the room combined to form something she had not felt in months: safety, stability, and a fragile but undeniable sense of home. The cowboy approached, carrying a basket of freshly gathered provisions from a nearby settlement. He placed it gently on the table, his eyes meeting hers in a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come together. Neither needed to speak. The unspoken understanding between them was strong, filled with trust, respect, and the quiet promise of companionship. Every glance, every movement carried meaning, the slow, deliberate building of a bond that had begun with fear and desperation, and now blossomed into hope and care. The baby stirred, stretching tiny hands and letting out a small, contented coo. The mother smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. The cowboy crouched beside her, resting a strong hand lightly on her shoulder. His presence was no longer just protective, it was participatory, engaged, and patient, embodying a commitment that words could never fully capture. Together, they formed a fragile family, bound not by obligation, but by choice, by trust, and by the shared experiences of hardship and survival. They spent the morning tending to the cabin and the small garden they had begun to cultivate, working in quiet synchrony. She marveled at the rhythm of life that had emerged. Meals prepared, fire tended, seeds planted and nurtured. Each action, small and ordinary, now carried extraordinary significance because it was shared. In these acts, the slow burn of connection deepened into the first flickers of love, gentle and unhurried, like the sun warming the thawing plains. As the day progressed, they paused to watch the horizon together. Snow melted into green shoots, frost gave way to soft earth, and the plains seemed to promise that life could move forward, resilient, patient, and filled with possibility. The mother allowed herself a rare sense of optimism. She had survived storms, abandonment, and fear. And now, she had someone who stood beside her, not only as a guardian, but as a partner in building a future. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "This is only the beginning. We'll face the world together, and we'll make it better than before." She nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude and hope. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she believed in the possibility of joy, in the promise of love, and in the quiet, enduring strength of connection. The baby babbled, the fire crackled, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, vast and forgiving, a mirror of the new chapter that had begun inside the cabin. They had found each other amidst the storms, and now, together, they would build a life filled with warmth, trust, and love. A life that promised not just survival, but hope, redemption, and the slow, steady bloom of happiness. In the silence of the morning, the first true beginning of their story was written. A beginning forged from snow and hardship, from kindness and courage, and from the redemptive power of love.